The Navy SEAL laughed when he asked her rank, because no one in that room believed a quiet woman with a visitor badge could outrank him. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him, calm as still water, and said, "Higher than yours." The room froze. What followed would expose a traitor hiding in plain sight, bring 4 generals to their feet in unison, and rewrite the meaning of authority for everyone watching. If you believe dignity should never be optional, stay with this story. The base woke before the sun. Lights flickered on in administrative wings, boots echoed on concrete corridors, and the smell of burnt coffee drifted through briefing rooms where rank decided who spoke and who stayed silent. She arrived alone. Her name on the temporary badge read, Elena Ward, labeled simply as Systems Integration Contractor. No insignia, no ribbons, no visible rank. The kind of badge people stopped noticing after a few seconds. She walked with an unhurried pace, shoulders level, chin neutral. Not stiff, not relaxed, balanced. Anyone trained long enough would have recognized it, the posture of someone who never needed to announce herself. But most people did not look closely. Inside the operations annex, a group of Navy SEALs waited for a routine interoperability briefing. They were tired, sharp-edged, running on caffeine and habit. At the center stood Admiral Thomas Hale, a man whose reputation preceded him louder than his footsteps. He had built a career on decisive command and a belief that hierarchy, enforced publicly, prevented chaos. Elena took a seat along the wall, opened a slim tablet, and began observing. She did not type. She did not scroll. She watched. When the Admiral entered, conversations snapped shut, chairs aligned, backs straightened. Hale's eyes swept the room and stopped on her. He frowned. "Who's that?" he asked, not unkindly, but not quietly either. A junior officer cleared his throat. "Contractor, sir. Cyber systems. Temporary access." Hale tilted his head, assessing her like an object left where it didn't belong. A SEAL near the front smirked. "Didn't know it started sitting in on op briefings." Soft laughter rippled through the room. Elena did not react. Hale took a step closer. "Contractor," he said, "stand up." She did. Up close, the details became harder to ignore. The faint white line along her forearm, the kind left by shrapnel rather than accidents. The steady rhythm of her breathing, slow and measured, the pattern taught to people who had learned to function under extreme pressure. Her eyes never darted. They tracked. Hale folded his arms. "What's your rank?" A pause. It was not a real question. It was theater, a reminder of place. The SEALs waited for her to stammer, to apologize, to explain that she had none. Elena met his gaze. "Higher than yours," she said. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was surgical. A SEAL chuckled once, then stopped when no one joined him. Hale's expression hardened. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," Elena replied, voice even. A ripple of discomfort spread. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. Hale's jaw tightened. "Security," he said. "Escort the contractor out and revoke her access." 2 military police officers moved forward, uncertain. Elena did not resist. She calmly closed her tablet, stood, and allowed herself to be escorted toward the side corridor. As she walked, she spoke, not loudly, not urgently. "Protocol Echo Lantern," she said. "Phase verification." The MPs hesitated. One glanced at her badge scanner. It flickered once, then turned red, then green. A low chime sounded, soft, unmistakable. Somewhere deep within the building, a secure alert triggered. Hale noticed. "What did you just do?" he demanded. Elena stopped walking. I followed procedure, she said, the same one that activates when an active covert operator is improperly detained on a classified installation. The room shifted. This was no longer a joke. A junior intelligence officer's tablet lit up. Then another. Secure channels opened without manual input, screens populating with access logs, clearance codes, and a designation that made blood drain from faces. Status active, clearance top tier, identity restricted. One line stood out, stark and quiet. Official status deceased. Hale stepped back as if struck. You're saying, he began. Before he could finish, the doors at the far end of the room opened. 4 generals entered together. Not ceremonially, not announced. They saw Elena, and without hesitation, every one of them stopped and saluted. The sound was unified, sharp, final. No one breathed. Elena returned the salute, not crisply, but respectfully. At ease, she said. The room obeyed her. Hale stood frozen, the weight of his earlier laughter crashing down on him. One of the generals turned, eyes cold. Admiral Hale, he said, you have just interfered with an active counterintelligence operation. Another added, and embarrassed yourself in the process. Elena finally spoke again, her tone unchanged. I was here to map an information leak, she said. Someone has been selling classified operational data through private channels. I needed to see who reacted to pressure, who enforced hierarchy without verification, and who panicked when protocols activated. Her gaze passed briefly over Hale. And now, she said softly, we know. As security quietly moved toward the admiral, the room understood something deeper than rank. Authority, real authority, did not shout. It waited, and it always kept receipts. No one spoke after the salute. The generals exited as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind a room that felt smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves had leaned inward to listen. The screens went dark one by one. Conversations that usually restarted immediately after authority left the room did not return. Elena Ward remained standing near the wall, hands relaxed at her sides, posture unchanged. She did not look victorious. She did not look angry. She looked exactly the way she had before the question was asked. That unsettled people more than the salute. Admiral Hale was escorted out through a side door, not in handcuffs, not yet, but with 2 officers walking half a step behind him instead of beside. It was a subtle shift, the kind that only people who lived inside hierarchies noticed. Power had moved, and everyone in the room felt the current. As the door closed, a young SEAL exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath. Another stared at the floor, replaying his own laughter from minutes earlier, hearing it now as something foreign and embarrassing. Elena took her seat again. She opened her tablet. Only now did she begin to type. What most of them did not know was that the salute had not been the climax of the operation. It had been a signal, a quiet confirmation that the net had been set and that the real work could begin. Across the base, systems responded. Not alarms, not sirens, small things. Access permissions refreshed themselves. Background audits began to run, disguised as routine maintenance. Logs that had once been fragmented started aligning, like scattered puzzle pieces drawn together by a magnet. In a secure office 2 floors below, Commander Alan Brooks, head of base security, stared at his screen with growing unease. He had spent his career learning the difference between noise and pattern. What he saw now was not noise. He noticed how certain credentials appeared repeatedly in places they shouldn't. Not constantly, Not enough to trigger alarms, just often enough to feel intentional. Always at odd hours. Always followed by subtle operational delays elsewhere. Brooks leaned back in his chair. So it wasn't paranoia, he murmured. Earlier that morning, he had dismissed a nagging feeling as fatigue. Now, watching the data reorganize itself without his prompting, he understood that someone had been waiting for permission to let the truth surface. He knew who that permission had come from. On the other side of the base, Master Chief Thomas Reed stood near the motor pool, watching mechanics work on vehicles that didn't need repair. He had seen this before, in different forms, in different wars, the lull before accountability. One of the younger SEALs approached him hesitantly. "Chief, was she really?" Reed didn't answer directly. "Next time," he said instead, "you laugh at someone who doesn't look important. Remember this morning." The SEAL swallowed and nodded. Reed watched him walk away, then allowed himself a slow breath. He thought of the scar he had glimpsed on Elena's arm, the way her eyes had tracked exits even while seated, the way she had not flinched when authority leaned toward her instead of away. He had known, not consciously, but in the way experience recognizes its own. Elena moved through the base unescorted now, though no one had formally assigned her clearance. Doors opened before she reached them. Conversations paused when she entered, then resumed more carefully after she passed. She did not linger. She did not intimidate. She observed. In the communications wing, she paused just long enough to notice which officers avoided eye contact and which tried too hard to appear calm. In logistics, she watched a civilian contractor fumble a badge scan twice before it finally accepted. In intelligence review, she noted who asked questions and who stayed silent. Every reaction mattered. The rumors began to spread, distorted by fear and imagination. Some said she outranked everyone on the base. Others claimed she answered only to Washington. A few whispered that she wasn't even officially alive anymore. Elena did nothing to correct them. Fear, she knew, made people careless. By midday, the base felt different. The usual sharp confidence of routine had been replaced by something brittle. People double-checked permissions. They hesitated before sending messages they once would have fired off without thought. Jokes died halfway through sentences. In a quiet server room, Chief Engineer Victor Lane wiped his palms on his trousers and stared at a system readout that refused to settle. He had always believed himself invisible, a man who kept things running while others took credit. But now, with background processes waking up like watchful animals, he wondered how much of his invisibility had been assumed rather than earned. He thought of a request he had approved months earlier, a small one, seemingly harmless. At the time, it had felt easier not to ask questions. Now, he wished he had. Elena stopped outside the server room, listening to the hum through the door. She did not enter. She marked the timestamp in her mind and moved on. There would be time later. Not far away, in a glass-walled office overlooking the runway, a secure call connected without ringing. A man listened silently as a calm voice summarized the morning's events in precise, unadorned language. When the report ended, he smiled faintly. "So," General Nathaniel Crow said, "she's finally revealed herself." The voice on the line did not respond. Crow turned toward the window, watching a transport aircraft lift into the sky. "Good," he continued softly. "Let them think the story ends with a salute." He ended the call and returned to his work, already planning his next move. Back on the base floor, Elena paused near a wide window overlooking the ocean. The water was calm, deceptively so. She allowed herself a single moment of stillness, feeling the familiar weight of being seen and unseen at the same time. The first layer had been peeled away. The second would not be as gentle. She turned and walked back into the corridors, her footsteps quiet, her presence steady, while behind her, the machinery of accountability continued to spin, unnoticed by most, unstoppable once begun. Somewhere, far from laughter and rank, the truth was arranging itself, and it was patient. By the time the sun began to lean toward the horizon, the base had settled into a new kind of silence. Not the comfortable silence of routine, but the cautious kind that comes after people realize they have been watched longer than they thought. Elena Ward sat alone in a small, unremarkable workspace near the edge of the intelligence wing. No name on the door, no window. Just a desk, a chair, and a screen that showed far less than it concealed. This was the room she had waited for, though she had never asked for it. She connected her tablet to the system without ceremony. There was no dramatic breach, no flashing warnings. The access unfolded smoothly, like a door that had always been unlocked for someone who knew where to push. Elena did not rush. She never did at this stage. Rushing made people sloppy. Patterns required patience. What she was building was not a list of names. It was a map. Not a map of locations, but of behavior. She began with time. Not exact minutes or seconds, but habits. Who logged in late at night when there was no urgent need? Who accessed files just before operational delays elsewhere? Who touched information and then never touched it again, as if afraid to leave fingerprints? She layered these habits gently, one over another, letting them overlap. Most of the data faded into background noise. That was expected. Most people were exactly who they appeared to be. A few were not. Elena leaned back slightly, eyes half-lidded, letting the information settle. This was the part of the work she had always found oddly calming. No confrontation, no hierarchy, just truth arranging itself when given enough space. She remembered the first month on base, when she had arrived as a contractor no one bothered to remember. How easily she had moved through corridors because no one thought someone like her mattered. How freely people spoke when they assumed no one important was listening. She had taken notes then, not on devices, but in memory. Who complained about procedures, who mocked oversight, who treated security like an inconvenience instead of a responsibility. Now those memories had context. Across the base, Commander Alan Brooks reviewed a summary that had quietly appeared in his secure queue. No sender listed, no urgency tag, just information. He frowned as he read. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a conclusion. It was a sequence. Access followed by outcome, again and again, each instance small enough to ignore on its own. Together, impossible to dismiss. Brooks felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "This isn't random," he said to no one. He knew better than to act on it immediately. Acting too fast would alert the wrong people. Instead, he did something far more effective. He waited. Back in her workspace, Elena marked another node on her internal map. One of the names appeared again, not directly, but adjacent to a permissions handoff that should have required a second layer of approval. It had not. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the face attached to that name. The easy confidence, the practiced neutrality. The way the man had never laughed, never mocked her openly. Those were often the most dangerous ones. In the maintenance bay, Chief Engineer Victor Lane stared at his terminal, reading and rereading a request he had approved long ago. At the time, it had seemed harmless, a minor extension, a temporary override requested by someone far above his pay grade. He told himself he hadn't known. But as the day wore on and the base grew quieter, that excuse felt thinner. Lane remembered Elena passing his doorway earlier, not stopping, not questioning, simply observing. He had felt exposed then, though nothing had happened. Now he understood why. Exposure did not always come with confrontation. Sometimes it arrived as understanding. Elena continued working, her movements economical, almost meditative. She translated every technical threshold into simple meaning in her own mind. Not numbers, but weight. Not codes, but intention. When a system flagged a near-perfect alignment between unauthorized access and downstream failure, she did not note the exact percentage. She did not need to. The match was close enough that coincidence no longer applied. She whispered it softly, for herself alone. Not an accident. The map deepened. One thread led outward, beyond the base, toward private entities that should never have seen this kind of information. Another curved upward, touching oversight channels that had gone strangely quiet at crucial moments. Elena felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, but recognition. This was larger than one arrogant admiral. As evening approached, a secure message arrived on her tablet. Brief, carefully worded, acknowledgement received. Continue observation. Do not escalate yet, she smiled faintly. They trusted her. That was rare. She shut down the screen and stood, stretching muscles that had been still for too long. Outside, the sky darkened into deep blue, the ocean reflecting the last light of day. The base lights flicked on one by one, orderly and unaware. Elena walked the perimeter path slowly, letting her thoughts drift just enough to breathe. She thought of the morning, of the laughter that had died so abruptly, of the salute that had changed everything for everyone else, but nothing for her. For her, this was still the middle. Far away, in a place without uniforms or visible rank, General Nathaniel Crow studied a different set of reports. He noted the same patterns Elena had seen, though he interpreted them differently. Interesting, he murmured, tracing a finger along a line of data. She's thorough. He closed the file and leaned back, untroubled. Thoroughness could be anticipated, controlled. What worried him was patience. Back on the base, Elena paused near the water's edge. She inhaled slowly, counting the rhythm of her breath not in numbers, but in steadiness. In and out. Present. Grounded. The map was nearly complete. Soon, the lines would no longer be invisible. Soon, the silence would speak, and when it did, it would not be loud. It would simply be undeniable. Silence had a way of unsettling people who were used to command. As daylight faded and the base shifted into its night rhythm, Elena Ward felt the change before she saw it. The corridors grew quieter, but not calmer. Doors closed a little faster. Conversations shortened. People who once moved with certainty now paused, as if waiting for permission that never came. She welcomed that pause. Silence, when sustained long enough, invited confession, not in words, but in behavior. Elena returned to her small workspace and reopened the map she had been building. Not on the screen this time, but in her mind. She thought in layers. Who moved when they thought no one was watching? Who avoided systems entirely? Who suddenly touched too much, too quickly, as if trying to bury something under activity? Those were the ones she watched closest. A message arrived from Commander Alan Brooks, phrased carefully, stripped of emotion. Routine maintenance window approved. Observations align with your preliminary assessment. Proceed with caution. Elena read it once and closed the message. Brooks was doing exactly what she hoped he would. Nothing dramatic, nothing traceable. Just enough cooperation to let the truth continue surfacing on its own. Down the hall, Chief Engineer Victor Lane sat alone, staring at a maintenance schedule that no longer made sense. He had volunteered for a late shift he did not need, telling himself it was diligence. In truth, it was fear. He replayed the small decisions in his mind, the temporary access he had granted, the approval he had clicked through without reading carefully. He had trusted the name attached to the request, the authority it implied. Now authority felt like a thin shield. Lane rubbed his eyes and opened a file he had not touched in months. He told himself he was just reviewing, just checking. But the moment his credentials authenticated, a quiet marker appeared in the system, unnoticed by him, but not by Elena. She felt it like a ripple. Elena did not act immediately. Acting immediately would spook him. Instead, she let the system breathe. Let Lane scroll, let him hesitate, let him realize slowly that the past did not stay buried just because time had passed. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Daniel Cross paced his quarters, replaying the morning's humiliation from a different angle. He had laughed. He had joined in. He had enforced a hierarchy that no longer felt stable. Cross told himself he had done nothing wrong. Contractors were not supposed to speak that way. Protocol existed for a reason. But the salute had undone that comfort. He opened his terminal and began drafting a message he never sent, then erased it. He opened a second window, checking access records he was not technically authorized to review. His hand hovered, then clicked. Another ripple. Elena marked it. In the intelligence wing, a routine audit expanded quietly. Not a sweep, not an investigation, just a widening circle of awareness. Files that had once lived in isolation now sat side by side, their timelines aligning without accusation. The pattern grew clearer. There it was, the same sequence repeating with subtle variations. A request, an approval, a transfer. Then, days or weeks later, a mission complication that had once been blamed on weather, or logistics, or bad luck. Elena did not feel anger. She felt focus. She remembered a different night, years earlier, when silence had meant something else entirely. When her own name had disappeared from systems. When being officially listed as dead had been the only way to move forward without being tracked. Back then, silence had been survival. Now, it was leverage. As night deepened, the base lights reflected off the ocean like scattered stars. Elena stepped outside briefly, letting the cool air steady her. She counted her breaths not by number, but by feel, the way she always had. Even, controlled, present. Her tablet vibrated softly. Unauthorized escalation detected. Subject attempting data obfuscation. She glanced at the message and exhaled. Someone had lost patience. Inside a secured office, Victor Lane stared at his screen as error messages appeared. Gentle at first, then insistent. Not warnings, reminders. The system was not accusing him. It was simply refusing to cooperate. Lane's heart pounded. He tried another approach, then another, each attempt leaving a slightly clearer trace. He did not realize that by trying to hide, he was drawing a brighter outline around himself. Elena returned to her workspace and watched the traces accumulate. each one translating itself into simple truth. Fear makes people predictable. Across the base, Commander Brooks noticed the same disturbance. He frowned, fingers steepled, and resisted the urge to intervene. Intervention would come later. For now, observation was enough. He thought of Elena, of her calm refusal to explain herself, of the way she had allowed disrespect to pass through her like wind through open ground. He understood now that she had been measuring something far more important than rank. Character. In a distant office far from the base, General Nathaniel Crowe reviewed a brief update. He noted the increased activity, the subtle tightening of oversight. He smiled faintly. "So," he said quietly, "they're getting nervous." He closed the file and made a note to adjust timelines. Nervous people rushed. Rushed people erred. Errors could be redirected. Crowe believed he was still several moves ahead. Back on the base, Elena watched the map fill in its final empty spaces. She did not need names yet. Names came later. What mattered now was understanding the shape of the thing, the way it breathed and reacted under pressure. She shut down her screen and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the hum of systems around her. Not the noise of machines, but the sound of accountability waking up. Tomorrow, someone would push too hard. Tomorrow, silence would break. And when it did, it would not shatter. It would simply give way. The first salute happened before anyone understood why they were standing. The briefing room had been prepared for routine explanations, not reckonings. Coffee steamed along the side table. Digital screens glowed with maps no one was really looking at. Admiral Thomas Reed stood at the front, posture rigid, jaw tight, already irritated by the unexpected audience gathering behind him. Elena Ward stood near the wall, hands relaxed at her sides, eyes lowered, not in submission, but in patience. The door opened without announcement. Conversation died instantly. General Marcus Hale entered first, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. Behind him came General Evelyn Park, then General Robert Sloan, and finally General Isaac Monroe. 4 stars, 4 commands. 4 people who never arrived together unless something had gone very wrong. Admiral Reed straightened instinctively. So did everyone else. The generals did not look at him. They looked at Elena. General Hale stopped 3 steps inside the room. His gaze met hers, and in that moment, the entire dynamic shifted. There was recognition there, not casual familiarity, but the quiet certainty of professionals who had crossed invisible lines together. Hale raised his hand and saluted. The sound was small, cloth brushing against skin, fingers snapping into place. But it landed like thunder. One by one, the others followed. 4 generals, 1 civilian contractor. The room froze. No one breathed. Admiral Reed turned slowly, disbelief hardening into something colder. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Elena did not move. She did not return the salute. She did not need to. General Park spoke instead, her tone even, almost gentle. "Stand down, Admiral. This briefing is no longer yours." Reed stared at her. "With respect, General, you're out of line. That woman has no rank here." General Sloan tilted his head slightly. "That depends on how you define rank." General Monroe stepped forward and placed a thin folder on the table. It made no dramatic sound, but it might as well have shattered glass. "Authorization record," Monroe said. "Level Black Delta clearance, joint oversight, direct reporting authority." Reed scoffed, A sharp, brittle sound. That clearance doesn't exist. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. It does. It just doesn't exist for people who ask. Silence followed. Heavy, absolute. General Hale nodded once. Ms. Ward has been embedded across 5 commands over the last 14 months. Her assignment was to observe, not intervene. Admiral Reed felt heat crawl up his neck. Observe what? Elena lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time since the humiliation the day before. There was no anger there, no satisfaction, only clarity. Patterns, she said. Access, timing, who assumed they were invisible. General Park tapped the screen behind them. The maps changed, resolving into timelines, softened, simplified, designed for clarity rather than intimidation. Dates aligned, transfers overlapped, delays coincided with approvals. No symbols, no codes, Park said, almost kindly. Just cause and effect. Lieutenant Cross swallowed hard in the back of the room. He recognized those timestamps. He had touched some of those systems himself, believing he was following orders. General Sloan continued. We began noticing operational failures that didn't fit weather models or logistical constraints. Missions that failed before they began. Information arriving just late enough to be useless. Monroe added. And every thread led back to a narrow band of approvals. Always lawful, always justified, always deniable. Reed's hands clenched. You're implying treason. Elena shook her head once. No, I'm describing negligence weaponized by ego. That landed harder than any accusation. General Hale turned to the room. This investigation is ongoing, but there is enough evidence to warrant immediate action. He looked back at Reed. You are relieved of duty pending review. Reed laughed, sharp and hollow. You can't do that without... Without what? General Park asked softly. Your signature? She slid another document forward. Already obtained. Yesterday, before this meeting. Reed's face drained of color. Security personnel appeared at the doorway, summoned not by urgency, but by inevitability. They did not touch Reed. They did not need to. He followed them out, spine stiff, dignity cracking with every step. As the door closed, the room remained silent. Then General Monroe turned to Elena and lowered his hand, the salute ending as cleanly as it had begun. Your report, he said. Elena nodded. Preliminary phase complete. And the larger network? Sloan asked. Elena's pause was brief, but deliberate. Still intact. This was a pressure point, not the source. General Hale exhaled slowly. We suspected as much. Elena glanced at the room, at the people who had laughed, dismissed, obeyed without thinking. The system wasn't broken, she said. It was comfortable. General Park allowed herself a faint smile. Comfort has always been the enemy of vigilance. Lieutenant Cross found his voice at last. Ma'am, he said, uncertain which title to use. Why didn't you stop it sooner? Elena looked at him, and her answer was quiet. Because stopping it would have taught nothing. Watching it fail teaches everything. The generals exchanged glances. Not agreement, understanding. As they prepared to leave, General Hale paused beside her. You'll remain on site? For now, Elena replied. There's still one shadow that hasn't moved. Hale nodded. Then we'll let you finish your work. They exited as they had entered, together, unannounced, leaving behind a room that would never feel the same again. Elena returned to her place by the wall. The coffee had gone cold. The screens dimmed. The hierarchy had reasserted itself, but differently now. Not louder, clearer. And somewhere beyond the base, someone who believed they were untouchable would soon realize that silence was no longer protecting them. It was watching. After the generals left, the base did not return to normal. It pretended to. Lights stayed on schedule. Guards remained at their posts. Reports continued to flow. But something essential had shifted, like a floorboard loosened beneath a familiar room. People moved carefully now, aware that patterns mattered, that habits had weight. Elena Ward felt it as she walked the long corridor back toward the intelligence wing. Not fear, awareness, the kind that sharpened the air. The salute had ended one story, but it had begun another. In her temporary workspace, she closed the door and stood still for a moment, letting the hum of servers settle into the background. She did not turn on the lights. She did not need to. Darkness made it easier to think. She reopened the map. Where earlier sessions had been about gathering, this phase was about subtraction, removing what was obvious, discounting what had already been exposed. What remained was never large, never loud. That was the problem. She traced the pattern backward, not from Admiral Reed's actions, but from the gaps around them. The moments when oversight should have tightened and did not. The approvals that never appeared in logs because they did not need to. The absence of correction where correction should have been reflexive. Elena did not think in titles. She thought in gravity. Some people pulled others into orbit without touching them. She highlighted a narrow band of decisions spread across different commands, different months, different justifications. On the surface, they looked unrelated. In practice, they bent the same way, like grass flattened by a wind no one saw. One name sat quietly at the center of that curve, General Nathaniel Crow. Elena did not rush to judgment. She never had. She replayed the sequence slowly, translating each technical marker into plain meaning. Not data, but behavior. Crow never accessed files directly. He did not need to. He did not sign off on questionable requests. He delegated, he advised, he suggested timing, and when things went wrong, he was always one step removed, present only as reassurance. Elena closed her eyes briefly, remembering the voice she had heard earlier in the day. Calm, faintly amused. Let them think the story ends with a salute. She opened her eyes. Across the base, Commander Alan Brooks sat at his desk long past midnight. He had not gone home. He doubted he would sleep even if he tried. A single file remained open on his screen, untouched for nearly an hour. Brooks was not afraid of what he might find. He was afraid of what he already understood. He had served long enough to recognize the pattern Elena was tracing. He had just never allowed himself to follow it this far. Doing so meant admitting that the problem was not an outlier. It was structural. A soft chime sounded on his console, a message, no sender listed. Brooks read it carefully. Proceed slowly. Observe reactions, not statements. He exhaled. That instruction did not come from above him in the traditional sense. It came from somewhere older, quieter, somewhere that valued patience over speed. He closed the file and waited. In another building, Chief Engineer Victor Lane sat hunched over a cup of cold coffee, staring at nothing. His earlier panic had burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow calm. He had not been detained. He had not been questioned. That unsettled him more than punishment would have. He replayed his past decisions again, not defensively now, but honestly. He saw where he had chosen ease over diligence, where he had trusted authority instead of process. Lane understood something important in that moment. He had not been chosen because he was corrupt. He had been chosen because he was convenient. Elena returned to her work, layering Lane's quiet realization into the broader picture. Guilt manifested in many ways. Some people fled, some people froze. Some tried to correct the past, too late. Each reaction refined the map. Near dawn, Elena stepped outside onto the observation deck overlooking the ocean. The horizon was a thin silver line, the world holding its breath between night and morning. She thought of the mission that had taken her name from the system years ago. The day she had learned that disappearing could sometimes be the only way to see clearly. Crow had been there then too. Not at the center. Never at the center. Always at the edge of the frame. Elena's tablet vibrated softly in her pocket. Movement detected, subject initiating protective measures. She did not smile. Protective measures were not confessions, but they were close cousins. Back in his office, General Crow stood by the window, watching the sky lighten. He had received the same quiet alerts Elena had, interpreted through a different lens. Systems tightening, oversight recalibrating. He admired the precision. He truly did. "She's good," he murmured to himself. He did not panic. Panic was for people who believed exposure meant defeat. Crow believed in adaptation, in shedding skins, in letting others take falls while he stepped sideways into shadow. He reached for a secure phone and paused. Then he set it down. For the first time in a very long while, he chose not to move. Back on the base, Elena watched the data settle into something unmistakable. Not a smoking gun, not a dramatic reveal, a silhouette. She saved the map, encrypting it not with complexity, but with restraint. Only what was necessary. Only what could not be denied once seen. As the sun crested the horizon, Elena closed her workspace and stood, stretching slowly. Fatigue tugged at the edges of her awareness, but she welcomed it. Fatigue meant progress. She walked down the corridor one last time before morning briefing, passing the places where laughter had once echoed, where authority had been mistaken for certainty. Soon, there would be another reckoning. Not public, not immediate, but inevitable. Elena paused at the doorway, looking back once, committing the quiet to memory. The most dangerous people, she thought, were never the loudest. They were the ones who waited. And now, finally, someone was waiting for them. Morning arrived without ceremony. The base woke the way it always did. Alarms chiming softly, doors unlocking in sequence, the ocean breathing against the shoreline as if nothing of consequence had happened. But for those who had been paying attention, everything felt subtly different. Not lighter, clearer. Elena Ward stood at the window of her temporary quarters, watching the first line of sunlight stretch across the runway. She had slept only a few hours, but rest came to her in fragments now, gathered between moments rather than demanded all at once. Fatigue did not trouble her. It reminded her that the work had reached a natural pause, not an end. A pause. Behind her, the room was sparse, a bed neatly made, a chair untouched. The life of someone who never planned to stay long anywhere. She moved through it with quiet efficiency, gathering the few items she carried with her from place to place. Nothing sentimental, nothing that tied her to a single version of herself. When she stepped back into the corridor, the base felt almost gentle, People nodded as she passed, some with respect, some with regret, a few with relief. Lieutenant Daniel Cross stood near the operations desk, his posture less rigid than it had been days earlier, his eyes more careful. "Ma'am," he said, choosing the word deliberately, "I wanted to apologize." Elena stopped, giving him her full attention. "I didn't know," he continued, the words practiced but sincere. "About you. About what was happening. I thought following orders was the same as doing the right thing." Elena studied him for a moment, not weighing his rank or his future, but his understanding. "Following orders," she said quietly, "is easy. Thinking costs more." Cross nodded, absorbing that. "I'll remember." "That's enough," Elena replied, and moved on. In the security wing, Commander Alan Brooks watched the exchange from a distance. He felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. The investigation had not been loud. There had been no spectacle, but the system had corrected itself, not through force, but through attention. Brooks knew his role now. He would not become famous. He would not be praised publicly, but he would be vigilant, and vigilance, he understood at last, was not a burden. It was a duty. Elsewhere, Chief Engineer Victor Lane sat at his desk, drafting a report that did not excuse his past decisions. He described them plainly, without defense or flourish. It was not a confession in the legal sense. It was something quieter: responsibility. He did not know what consequences would follow. He accepted that uncertainty. In some ways, it felt like relief. Elena made her way toward the briefing room one final time. The door was open. Inside, General Eleanor Frost stood alone, reviewing a thin stack of documents. She looked up as Elena entered and allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "It's done here," Frost said. "For now," Elena replied. Frost nodded. "The larger network will take time. People like Crow don't vanish overnight." "No," Elena agreed. "They rarely vanish at all." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that did not demand to be filled. "You could stay," Frost offered at last. "There's a position, advisory. You've earned rest." Elena considered the offer, not as temptation, but as possibility. For a brief moment, she imagined a life where her name stayed on records, where her days followed a predictable arc. Then she shook her head. "Rest," she said, "is not the same as stillness, and I'm not finished." Frost accepted that without argument. "Then go carefully." Elena smiled faintly. "I always do." Outside, the base resumed its rhythm. Aircraft lifted into the sky. Conversations returned, more measured now, less careless. Authority had not been diminished. It had been clarified. Elena walked toward the perimeter gate, her steps unhurried. No escort followed her. None was needed. As she passed the spot where laughter had once echoed, she paused, not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition. The moment had mattered, not because it had elevated her, but because it had revealed something essential. Power, she reflected, was loud when it was insecure, quiet when it was earned. Beyond the gate, the road stretched toward places unnamed, missions unspoken, shadows that still believed themselves safe. Elena adjusted her jacket and stepped forward. Behind her, the base continued, steadier than before. Not perfect, never perfect, but awake. Somewhere, far from salutes and scrutiny, General Nathaniel Crow would eventually realize that the silence he relied on had changed, that it was no longer empty, it was listening, and when it spoke, it would not shout, it would simply be undeniable. Elena did not look back as she walked away. She carried no triumph with her, no bitterness. Only the quiet certainty that dignity, once restored, did not need to be defended loudly. It needed to be lived.